special member function used to initialize the object of a class automatically. When you want to copy the contents of one object to another object, then we are using copy constructor. When you create object of a class, then automatically this function will execute. No need to call this function separately. A constructor which does not accept any argument is called as default constructor. Welcome back to one and all. Myself, Vasanta, lecturer in Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, Pre-University College, Temple of Excellence, Mysore. Today, we are going to start with the revision class on Constructor and Destructor chapter. Whereas, from this chapter, you may expect two questions from this chapter. One is in part B, one question for 2 marks, and one more question in part D, one question for 5 marks. Totally 2 questions, but total weightage of this chapter is 7 marks. Because 2 marks 1 question as well as 5 marks 1 question you may expect from this chapter. Whereas when I come on this chapter, the major concept of this chapter are like what do you mean by constructor, which are the different types of constructor, and what are the rules to follow while naming a constructor. Then what do you mean by destructor? This is a major concept you will study on this chapter. That is, what do you mean by constructor? Under types of constructor, default constructor, parameterized constructor, copy constructor, as well as destructor. These are the major concept you will study on this chapter. Whereas for 2 marks, you may expect the question, what is constructor? Give syntax and an example for constructor. Whereas when they come on constructor, constructor is a special member function used to initialize the object of a class automatically. Here we are not able to do any calculation, only we can able to perform initialization. We are not able to do any calculation or input operation or output operation like that. We cannot able to perform any other operation. Only thing here we can able to initialize the object of a class automatically. That is, it is a special member function that is used in classes to initialize the object of a class automatically is called as constructor. A constructor is a special member function of a class with the same name as that of class. For example, here consider a class. The class name I am going to call it as add. On this, in public section, we are taking add only, and here empty bracket if I am going to write, that is the default constructor. Here for example, I will initialize a equals 0. Then we are closing the function, then later on we are going to close the class. Then from this you come to know that class name and function name are same here. And here only we can able to initialize, that is a equals some value we can able to initialize, where a may be 0, 1, 2, 3 or any other values. It means that only initialization we can able to perform on this constructor. Then in the syntax, first class, then class name here you have to write. In private section, declare the variable, whichever variable you want you can declare that. Then compulsory constructor should be declared in public section only with the access specifier public. Then here class name. Then here if you have arguments, write down the arguments. Otherwise close the just empty parenthesis. Then here we are opening the constructor and here we are closing the constructor. Then here we are closing the class. It means that the class name as well as function name are same. It should be declared in public section. This is the general syntax to represent a constructor. Then here if you observe the example, here the class name we are given as sum, and in private section we are declaring int a, whereas a is a variable of type integer format. Then in public section we are declaring the function sum. See, the class name and function name are same here. Here also we have sum and here also we have sum. Then here we are initializing, that is a equals 0. Then we are closing the constructor and then we are closing the class. This is constructor and this is class. Now is it clear? Next, mention different types of constructor. When we come on constructor, Constructor can be classified into three types. Constructor can be classified into three types. One is default constructor. Second one, parameterized constructor. And the last one is copy constructor. Whereas in default constructor, see class, for example, add here will take, and in this public section, we are taking add only. If it is empty bracket, then it can be called as default constructor. Here, we are closing the class. It means that if you have empty bracket, then it can be called as default constructor. Whereas for parameterized constructor, class add only we will write. Here in public section, we are taking add only inside the bracket, for example, int a if I am going to write. Then here I will initialize the value. Then here we are closing the function. Then if you observe here, if you have the arguments here, then it can be called as parameterized constructor. Whereas copy constructors are used to copy an object from one existing to a new one. The name itself suggesting copy constructor. When you want to copy the contents of one object to another object, then we are using copy constructor. Three types: default, parameterized, and one more is copy constructor. Next, how are parameterized constructors are invoked? Already I told you, in constructor, three types. One is default, parameterized, and one more is copy. Whereas in default, we does not have any arguments. Here we have arguments, but here we are copying from one object to another object. But when you come on parameterized constructor, it can be invoked in three methods. One is implicit call, another one is explicit call, and another one initialization at the time of declaration with assignment operator. In three methods, we can able to invoke the parameterized constructor. That is, when they come on how parameterized constructor can be invoked by using explicit call, implicit call, and one more is initialization at the time of declaration with assignment operator. By these three methods, parameterized constructor can be invoked. Invoked is nothing but called. Next, what is constructor? Write the rules for writing constructor function. When they come on constructor, already I told you, class, for example, add only we are going to consider. On this in private section, we are declaring the variable, for example, int a. Then in public section, we are taking add function only. Then here, for example, empty bracket I will write, that is default constructor. On this, I will initialize a value equals 0. Then we are closing this constructor. Then later on, we are closing the class. If you observe here, then here class name as well as function name are same in constructor. Already I told you, constructor is mainly used for initialization purpose. For initialization purpose, we are using constructor. It's a special member function used to initialize the object of a class automatically. When we come on rules of constructor, class name and function name should be same here. That is the first rules. And here, if you observe, compulsory in public section only, we have to declare the constructor. You are not supposed to declare any constructor in private as well as in product case. Compulsory you have to declare that in public access specifier. First point, class name and function name are same. It should be declared in public section. And here, this function does not have any written type specifier. Not even word also. Here we don't have any written type specifier, not even word also. And here the functions, especially the constructor functions, can be defined both inside as well as outside also. And this constructor function, no need to call separately. When you create object of a class, then automatically this function will execute. No need to call this function separately. Whereas in the main program, when you are creating object, no, on that time, once if I create the object, automatically this function will execute. And here, no need to mention which type it is here. It means that it is not possible to refer the address also here. We cannot able to identify the address of the constructor here. See, whereas it is a special member function that is used in a class to initialize the object of a class automatically. When the common rules, class name and function name should be same. That is, a constructor always has name that is same as that of class name, of which they are members. Then second point, there is no return type for a constructor, not even void. Whereas in other function, void get data, void compute, void display we will write. Whereas here, we are not using any return type specifier here, not even void also. Then a constructor should be declared in public section. Observe here, compulsory, it has to be declared in public section only. Then a constructor is invoked automatically when objects are created. Whereas in this program, add is the class name. When I am going to create object, for example, add object, then automatically, when I am going to create the object, automatically this constructor function will execute. Constructors can have default arguments. It may contain argument or it may not contain argument also. It is not possible to refer to the address of the constructor in the memory exactly on which place the constructor is present. That is not possible to identify here. The constructors makes implicit call to the operator new and delete when memory allocation is required. By itself, implicitly means by itself, whenever it needs memory, by using new operator, by itself it will call. Whenever it does not want memory, on that time by itself it is going to use delete operator to delete the memory space. These are the few rules we have to follow while writing a constructor function. Next, mention the different types of constructor and explain any one in detail. Then on that case, if you want, you can explain default constructor or parameterized constructor or copy constructor. Any one you can able to explain here, because in the question, explain any one they are given. Then when they come on types, default, parameterized constructor and one more is copy constructor. Whereas in this case, now we are explaining default constructor. Whereas in default constructor, if you don't have any arguments, then it can be called as default constructor. A constructor which does not accept any argument is called as default constructor. Whereas in the previous example here, if you don't have any arguments here, then it can be called as default constructor. Whereas here, it is also known as zero argument constructor also. It can also be called as zero argument because it does not contain any arguments. That's why it can be called as zero argument constructor. Next, when they come on syntax, see class, then class name. In private section, declare whichever variable you want. Then in public section, once again we will write the class name. Here, whatever initialization you want, inside this you can initialize. Then we are closing this class. It means that if you have empty bracket here, then it can be called it as default constructor. Default constructor. Now is it clear? Next, in the example, if you observe here, for example, ash include iostream.h, the header file. Then class name we are given as x here. Then in private section, we are declaring the variable int a and b. Then in public section, once again I am taking the same name of class, x only. Then here empty bracket. From this I can say that now we are creating a constructor. Here we are initializing for a equals 10 as well as b equals 20. Then here we are closing this constructor function. Then here after this, inside the class definition only, we are taking void display function. On that, a, whatever value a is there, that I want to display. For example, here a value is 10 and b value is 20. To display that a, set w5, b we are given. It means that in between it will going to give 5 space and then it will display 10 as well as 20. Then we are closing display function. Then later on here we are closing the class. Whereas in the main program we are creating objects. X object 1, comma object 2. Totally here we have two objects. Here when they come on default constructor, especially all the objects are initialized by same set of values. For example, object 1 dot display if I'm going to give, then 10 and 20 only it will display. Object 2 dot display if I'm going to write, then also it will display A value is 10 and B value is 20 only. In default constructor, for each object we cannot able to give different set of values. All objects are initialized by same set of values here. Then when they come on features of default constructor, for every object created, this constructor is automatically called here. When I am going to create object, automatically this constructor function will execute. All objects of a class are initialized to same set of values by default constructor. Whereas here I told you object 1 as well as object 2. In both the case, for both the object you will take 10 as well as 20. Here also 10 as well as 20. It means that how many objects you want you can create. But all the objects are initialized by same set of values. If different objects are to be initialized with different values, it cannot be done using default constructor. For each object, we cannot able to give different set of values here. Whereas if I want to give different set of values, then compulsory we have to use parameterized constructor. Whereas in parameterized constructor, for each object, we can able to give different set of values. Whereas in default, all objects are initialized by same set of values. Then when they come on disadvantage of default constructor, when many objects of the same class are created, all objects are initialized to same set of values by default constructor. And here it is not possible to initialize different objects with a different initial values using default constructor. These are the few disadvantages of default constructor. Then next question, here you may going to expect like what is the purpose of destructor? Write the syntax and example. Whereas when they come on constructor, it is used to initialize. On that case, it will allocate the memory space. Whereas when they come on destructor, whatever memory allocated by the constructor, that can be destroyed here. The name itself suggesting destructor. Whereas constructor means constructing the building we can consider. Whereas destructor means demonstrating that building here. We can destroy that building here. Whereas in constructor, it occupies the memory. Whereas in destructor, the memory can be deallocate here. Whereas when we come on destructor, destructor is also a special member function. A special member function that will be executed automatically when an object is destroyed is called it as destructor. And here compulsory we are using tilde operator. This can be called as a tilde. Like this if you write, then it can be called as tilde operator. Whereas both constructor as well as destructor look same way, but the destructor have tilde operator before the constructor name. Then it can be called as destructor. Like constructor, the destructor name is same as that of class but preceded by tilde operator. Then when they come on features of destructor, on that here compulsory a destructor name is same as that of class but preceded by tilde operator. Then destructors do not have written value. Here also it does not have any written value. In constructor also we does not have any written value, whereas in destructor also we does not have any written value. Then destructor cannot be overloaded. It cannot overloaded. But when the command parameterized, there we can able to perform. Whereas in destructor, it is not possible. It cannot be overloaded. Next, here if you observe the syntax, see class, then class name we have. If I want to use destructor, then compulsory there must and should be constructor also we have. Then here in private section, we are declaring the data members and whichever functions you want you can declare. In public section, this is nothing but class name once again. Then this can be called as constructor. See, here class name, here also we have class name. Then here if you observe, here also we have class name. But before this class name, we have tilde operator. From this, it can be called as destructor. Here we have opened the class, that class here we are closing. This is nothing but destructor. Whereas class name as well as destructor name are same, but it is preceded by tilde operator. Constructor will allocate the memory, destructor will deallocate the memory. If you observe the example, whereas in this example we are given ash include iostream.h. This is a supporting header file for scene as well as cout function. Then next, ash include conio.h. This is a supporting header file for clear screen as well as getcs function. Then we are taking the class name as num. Num is the class name. In private section, we are taking only one variable x of type integer format. Then here in the public section, num we are taking. Then it is but constructor function here. And here we are written semicolon. It means that now we can able to write outside the class also. The definitions can be written outside the class also. Then void display function to display the result. Then here we are using destructor function. Here also num, class name, here also num. But it is preceded by tilde operator. From this I can say that it is a destructor function. Then here we are closing the class. Then on this, outside the class we are writing the definition of the constructor. Here anyhow already I told you we don't have any written type specifier. That's why directly we'll start class name and num is a function name. Both are same. That's why num scope resolution operator num will write. Then here in constructor we are initializing x value is 100. This is a value we are initialized for x. Then afterwards we are writing num scope resolution operator tilde num. It means that it is a destructor function. Here this is constructor and this is destructor function. Then after this we will display the value. Num, here void is a return type, num is a class name, display member function. Here the value of x, what exactly it will display? Because x we initialize it as 100, then here it will display the value of x is 100. Then we are closing this display function. Whereas here totally 3 functions are there. One is constructor function and one more is a destructor function and one more is regular member function. Then in the main program we are creating an object with the help of class name. Class name num, a we will write. Then when I am going to write a, automatically this constructor function will execute automatically. No need to call this separately. Then a dot display if I am going to write, then it will display the value of x is 100, then get ch, then here we are closing the main program. It means that if I want, I can able to write the statements, especially constructor inside the class as well as outside the class. Whereas constructor will allocate the memory space, whereas a destructor is used to deallocate the memory space. Now is it clear? Then it means that on this particular class, you came to know what do you mean by constructor. It is a special member function to initialize the object of a class automatically. Under that we have 3 types. One is default constructor, second one is parameterized constructor and third one is copy constructor. Whereas in default constructor, it also called as zero argument constructor because it does not contain any arguments. Whereas in parameterized constructor, it contains the arguments. That's why it is called as parameterized constructor. Whereas copy constructor is used to copy the object from one existing object to new object as it is. But when they come on rules to write a constructor, then class name and function name should be same. It should be declared in public section. It does not have any return type specifier, not even void. It is not possible to refer the address of the constructor. And here when they are going to create the object, automatically the constructor function will execute here. Then under parameterized constructor, it can be invoked. Invoke is nothing but called in 3 methods. One is implicit call and one more is explicit call and one more is initialization at the time of declaration with assignment operator. By that also we can able to call the parameterized constructor. Whereas in implicit call, after creating object, immediately we will write the argument. Whereas in explicit call, after creating object, we will write the assignment operator. Then once again class name, then arguments will write. Whereas in the last case, directly after creating object, we will write equal symbol, that is assignment operator, then we'll write the value. It means that in implicit as well as in explicit, when it can be used when you have one or more arguments. Whereas assignment operator is used when you have only one argument. Then when you come on copy constructor, copy from one object to another object. And here in destructor, whereas constructor will allocate the memory space, whereas a destructor will deallocate the memory space. These are the major concept of this chapter, because already I told you 2 questions you can expect from this chapter. One is for 2 marks and one more is for 5 marks. For 2 marks, types or what is constructor, write the syntax. Whereas for 5 marks, default constructor, parameterized constructor as well as copy constructor. With that, you may expect the destructor also. In the next class, we'll meet you once again with a new chapter. Thank you for all of you.